Hi. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Great. My name is Ron, and I'm a romance fan. And I'm really excited to be talking with these 5 authors tonight. I've got a couple of big questions that all of them can chime in on, but that will be geared towards somebody specific can jump in on each one. And my first one is going to be for you, Lisa, to start with. There's been a lot of confusion lately, I think, about sort of like the relationship that feminism and romance fiction have. You know, where even somebody like Hillary Clinton can come out and say that the genre is still full of, you know, men who throw their women on the backs of their horses and ride off into the sunset and perpetuate stereotypes of male and female relationships. And I wanted to start with you on that question because you had a really strong response to that in the Washington Post.
Yeah, yes, I did. I was really pleased and honored to be able to respond to it because, you know, I also went to Wellesley College, which, you know, as we know, is a feminist college, and and Hillary did too. So Hillary and I are like that. But when she made this comment that, you know, in romance that, you know, a guy would throw a woman on the back of a horse and ride off with her, it certainly was a description of what romance, you know, used to be much more often than it is now. And I think we have to be honest. We have to admit what romance was so that we can now be honest about where romance has come and where it's going. And it's difficult to make people understand when they haven't read any romance, especially currently, where it has gone and you know the status of it now. The blend of fantasy and feminism is becoming much more comfortable in today's romances. And I think especially in historical, we tend to think that women in historical times were all repressed, all with the corsets, you know, we're all meek and doormats. And when I was researching for, you know, many books, but especially for this one that's just coming out tomorrow, it really struck me how many incredible real-life women existed back then who broke barriers and did tremendously courageous things and yet really went unrecognized. So there was a particular woman, Dr. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who was a real-life woman who was the only female physician in England for about 20 years. And what happened was she always wanted to be a doctor, but there was no way to go to medical school back then for a woman in England, so she went to France. And so she became educated, got a degree there, came back to England, wanted to be certified to practice medicine in England, and then they were like, you know, no, you can't, there's no way, no one will give you the test. And the test could be administered by one of several different departments, you know, in medicine. And somehow she got in through a loophole into the apothecary test. So she took that, passed it, and then became certified to practice surgery, to become a licensed physician. As soon as she did that, the British Medical Association changed their rules, closed the loophole, and no other woman for 20 years was allowed to be a doctor in England. So here she was, practicing medicine, a trailblazer, and then I thought how exciting it would be to base character on her. And it's interesting because a couple of reviews that I've gotten have expressed their complete disbelief. There were no doctors at that time, women couldn't do that. And I was like, no, there was one. And it's important to think about what those women must have gone through and what their struggles were. The more you read actual accounts at the time, the more you realize we're facing a lot of those struggles now. Romance is addressing a lot of those struggles because as women, we all have to deal with issues of work, of struggling with balance, with love and children and career, and it's not, there are no easy answers. I remember when I was growing up, when I was very young, way back in the dark ages, that the consensus was if you wanted a serious career as a woman, you were not going to get married at all, you know, and you probably weren't going to have children. And then there was the we can have it all phase, where women were just stretched far too thin and very few accommodations were being made for them. So now, I'm not sure I'm qualified to say exactly where we are. It seems so fluid, but but I think that romance is addressing a lot of these questions, and so that's why it was so upsetting to hear Hillary characterize romance as something that it was. When we're in the game, all of us right now, we're dealing with this, we're in there saying important things, and romance readers get it and are saying important things too. So our community is quite active on behalf of women, and it's time the rest of the world understood that.
Anyone else want to chime in on this subject?
We are the resistance. If you follow any of us on Twitter, we're always in trouble.
True.
I mean, you know, we're not writing your grandmother's romance novels anymore. You know, we're giving women agency over their sexuality, the choices that they want to make. We're giving them hope. I mean, many of us who are authors have gotten, everybody's gotten a letter that said, this certain book changed my life. Or I used this book to get me through whatever. So I'm proud of that. And, you know, well, I'm not going to cuss today. Let's just go ahead.
Suck it.
So I'm going to pass the mic down here.
You know, I think something to keep in mind too is a lot of these critiques are written by romance community outsiders. And they don't really understand that we have been having these discussions forever. And we're sort of speaking at like a, you know, like level 300 class, and they're coming in at a 101. So that's what really strikes me about a lot of these, you know, think pieces, or when people make off-the-cuff comments and they're still referencing Fabio. We've been, like, we know there's problematic elements in romance, right? Like, in any genre, in any industry, there's going to be some issues with, you know, gender or sexuality or race or whatever the problematic aspect is. And we have, so many of us have been talking about this for decades, you know, well before we were even here, this industry has existed. So I think that's the frustrating aspect sometimes, is when somebody sort of comes in and says these things, and we go, yeah, you're like you're not even at our level. Like, we're up here and you're down here. And I think that's where like the main, you know, issue comes in.
I obviously agree that we're up there and they're down there. I didn't really like that Hillary Clinton thing because it felt like a setup to me too. Because like thinking about Hillary Clinton and how she gets criticized for every single thing, she was kind of in a trap. If someone asked her about romance and she said, yeah, I love romance novels, it would have been like, Hillary Clinton loves trashy books. Right. Which obviously, you know, we would have been like, yeah, hell yeah. But like, so I feel like while I don't even know why they asked her this question or why she was even talking about romance novels. She's not an authority on them. But that has nothing to do with her career. But like, so while I was really annoyed with it, I was also annoyed at the fact that she was even asked, because it seemed like they were just trying to set her up one way or another. Like, oh, she likes these books, that obviously means she isn't serious. Or she's talking trash about these books and she doesn't really care about women. So I felt like she kind of, I mean, obviously I wish she had answered differently and said, well, whatever, I like them, and I'm sorry, I believe that she has read romance. I've seen her reading mass market books that you couldn't see the cover of, and I'm going to guess it was romance.
No. So she was on a plane once, and she had a mass market paperback book on the tray table, and like Twitter CSI went into action. Found the book like ran up the Amazon charts, because I was, oh my god, Hillary, it was a mystery though.
It was a mystery or horror or something. It was a mystery. Yeah. The reason that Twitter, like, you know, went into detective mode is because the cover was, you know, there was glare from the sun coming through the window, and so the cover was just sort of like these vague amorphous shapes, and yet somebody, within 20 minutes, somebody would have said, oh yeah, that's part of that historical series.
What I loved about the moment was...
Apparently it's Victoria Thompson.
Well, what I loved about the moment was that, I can't remember what the hashtag was, I think it was Romances for Hillary, that it was so easy for Twitterlandia, Romance Twitterlandia, to come up with dozens and hundreds of titles where there are strong female protagonists of romance novels. It was like immediately immediately, and there were many, many, many.
So I think another key area, in addition to feminism, that the romance community has been grappling a lot with in recent years has been the diversity question. And one of the things that I like about, particularly about the Forbidden Loves series,
Forbidden Hearts. Yeah.
Forbidden Hearts.
It's all the same.
Yeah. Is that you've set up this kind of like Peyton Place-esque family melodramas, interlocking families in a community sort of series, with a very multicultural, broad spectrum of sexual identities. There's a lot going on in this sort of sweeping saga that has hot romance stories at the center of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, the question for everybody is in terms of creating romances that reflect the broader diversity of our society and culture, because again, there's been a time when the genre was fairly lily white.
It's still that. We're not at mission accomplished yet, but it's getting there. Baby steps. But no, one thing, and if you're kind of in the front, if you look around this room right now, take a look. I mean, you will see the visible differences between us, right? And there's invisible differences that you don't even know about. Like there's intersections upon intersections in this one room alone tonight. And so, I like to say, it's not really about diversity, it's about reality now. And I think one of the great things with having so many new voices and new platforms for a lot of authors is sort of bringing that reality view. I was actually talking to someone, so I moved around a lot growing up, in every possible. I've lived in big cities, I've lived in farming rural communities, I've lived in Fargo, North Dakota, I've lived everywhere. Are you from Fargo? What high school did you go to? What high school did you go to? Oh, I went to the South. Okay. Anyway, I lived there for a year. But you live in. I lived in a ton of places, and somebody once said to me "Oh, but if I'm writing small town romance, all small towns are white." And I was like, "Well, that's not true because I lived in Fargo, and it was pretty white, but I was there." I was there. I had friends there who were also, they were, Native, or they were, Asian like me, or they were Black. We were there. You maybe didn't see us, but we're everywhere, and that doesn't even take into account the invisible differences that you don't see amongst us. So I think at least when I write it, I wrote. My books are set in sort of like a upstate, middle-sized town. And that's kind of the town, those are the towns I know, because I know those people are there. And if you think they're not there, look around a little bit harder, because I guarantee you they're there. Guarantee you, if they're in Fargo, they're everywhere. And I have nothing but love for Fargo, by the way. It's a wonderful place. We used to get sandbag days when it flooded, and we'd go sandbag. It was wonderful. Wonderful place to do that. And so, I think that's sort of what a lot of people are doing, a lot of authors are doing, and we're lucky enough to have the platforms now with self-publishing and digital publishing, and romance really, we embrace technology so fast, we take it and we run with it. Our authors are the first to digitally publish, they were the first to self-publish, and we're the first ones to really make it successful, right, and to make it so that we can have a living doing that. And slowly we're making those changes, because I think the more viewpoints that you have creating media, the more you get to realize that the reality that you've been fed, that you think in your head is sort of canon, it's not really canon. You just have always seen it that way, because you've always maybe read it that way, or you've always watched TV like that. But that's not reality. This is reality. This room is reality.
And it was reality too, historically.
Of course, yeah.
I just want to say so much of the wonderful thing about the historical romance writers on this panel is that it's not. There is a reality that represents in our books, which represents the reality of, for instance, the United States in the 19th century, and which the 30s, right, and the British Empire of the early 19th century. So to see it in the book seems to be an obvious thing, right? But
you know what it guys, I mean, when I talk about canon, can I say nipples in here? Now I say all the words. All the words are
Broken the nipple ice.
All right, hold on your butt. So I broke the butt ice too. So, many years ago when I first started writing, someone said to me, like, oh, this was the first book where the heroine had brown nipples in it, like on page. And I was like, what? That's crazy. And she was like, no, she's a long-time romance reader. And I thought about it, I'm like, that's kind of true, but I'm pretty sure nipples come in all shades. But they were always pink on page, right? They're always pink or berries or some sort of like pink fruit, reddish fruit. But white people have like not pink nipples. Wait, I've gone too far. Okay, let me bring this back. But what happens is, it goes into one book, it goes into 10 books. Those people read those books and write their own books. And suddenly everyone's got pink nipples. And they forget about the fact that that's not reality. So that's what happens. I mean, the reality sort of gets...
brown nipples in
Yeah.
Because, and that was...
But if I started.
And that was one of the things that, the reader said to me early on, and no offense, but it was like, we're trying to read about pink nipples. So, yeah.
Digressing from that, but it's like it drives me these assumptions. It drives me crazy that so many female writers as well as male writers write this bizarre thing about the maidenhead or the hymen. Apparently, it's like 8 inches up inside. You had one at one point. Why are you writing it like it's something else on the body?
I know.
But somebody, I would like to know who wrote that the first time. And then after that, it was like 3 million people wrote it like that. So these assumptions, they start
Reality
Yeah.
gets clouded, yeah.
That's crazy. Nobody took anatomy.
I actually saw somebody look daggers the other day, and I thought, that's it. Like, I've never seen anybody look daggers. I think I've written somebody looking daggers.
Yes, but have you seen Panther like Grace before?
And we're totally off topic. I love it. No, this is fun.
Yeah. Lisa touched upon this a little bit when she was talking about the subject of Hello Stranger, but A Princess in Theory, I think, really got at something for me in terms of it's a story about a prince who falls in love with an ordinary, kind of an extraordinary New Yorker, but economic and class issues are really foregrounded in this story in a really critical way, I think. But to me, the genre, both of contemporary romance and chick lit in general, has often been about women's agency, and particularly their economic agency and self-sufficiency. And just in the ways that you were not shying away from confronting those issues head on.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, with that book, a lot, I lived in New York for most of my life, or in Jersey City. I grew up across the river in Jersey City, and moved to New York after I graduated. And I worked at a scientific journal, so in publishing. And anyone who works in publishing, you don't make that much money. and even if you make a fair amount of money in New York, you're still living paycheck to paycheck. So basically my reality of trying to figure out the rent, eating ramen noodles, well past the time when you graduated college. Also, I just think ramen noodles are good. But I felt like when I read romances, I have read several romances that reflect different economic realities. But for this one, I was trying to reflect the very kind of specific New York paycheck to paycheck. You're not exactly poor, because if you lived somewhere else, then you would be able to buy your own house probably. But working several jobs, because that was something I also did, where you're just trying to make ends meet and not be able to splurge sometimes. Because also living in New York, part of it is trying to be able to go out and do things, and you need money to do that. So with her, I was trying to reflect kind of a more realistic New York experience, also because a lot of times books can focus on like, because there are so many rich people living in New York, and that's one fantastic element that people enjoy reading about. But I also kind of wanted to read about someone kind of, you know, living paycheck to paycheck, who's a student and who's living in New York, but actually doesn't have time to do the fun New York things because she's so busy, which I think a lot of that's another aspect of New York life. And also as the contrast, you know, with the prince he's pretending to be her neighbor Jamal, who is renting from her, he sent her neighbor on a trip and is using it as an Airbnb basically. So for him to see the reality of, it's not the reality of his kingdom, but the reality of what it's like, even in one of the most, the richest cities in the world, that the average person is not living, you know, in a high rise with a doorman and stuff like that.
And I know, like, you know, economics and economic, that kind of like financial disparity and a woman's self-sufficiency, that I know that's at the heart of Tempest as well.
Yeah, I mean, all my women, they all have jobs. You know, one of the you know, underpinnings of being black in America in the 19th century, if you were female, you had to work. Whether you wanted to work or not, you wanted to eat, you wanted to support your family. Those that were married, husbands weren't offered the full spectrum of, you know, economic employment opportunities. So most of the time, the lady, if she was married, had to work also in order to put food on the table. So, but in this instance, with Tempest, Regan is the one with the money. She is. You know, she's married to this poor ass doctor. You know, and he's taking, you know, treating people for free and, you know, taking chickens and rabbits and, you know, corn and all this other stuff for payment. So you sort of put that, I mean, it's what we do. You know, we turn things around and put them on the head and spin it around and give you a book. So looking at their economics, and he didn't mind. You know, I've got another book where we got the man just lost his mind, realizing that the woman made more money than him. But Colin didn't mind, so, yeah.
Well, it's been really interesting with the past two historicals that I've researched, you know, before writing, to give both of the heroines jobs, because it changes the dynamics, so it changes the decisions that they make. Back in historical times in England, around, like, say, the 1870s, you know, all through, even up until the 1870s, when a woman got married, if you were earning some decent money and you had a good job, as soon as you got married, everything that you owned literally went to your husband. If you worked after that, every penny, or, you know, hey penny, whatever, everything that you earned went to your husband without even passing through your hands. If someone left you land, like your father put it in a trust, you could not lease it to anyone, and you could not build upon it. Everything had to be handled by a man. Because of that, it's logical that the women who did have property, income, independence would have a difficult time if a man wanted to marry her. Because, you know, here, do you want the love of your life? Do you want someone you could really be happy with? Or do you want independence that very few women had, you know, and freedom? So it's funny because it seems, okay, when I wrote Devil in Spring, she wanted to own her own board game company. And I based her on a real life woman, Lizzie Meiji, who created the Monopoly game. And so I did have some response from some readers saying, you know, she should just give everything up because he's this wonderful guy, he's titled, he's... Yes, exactly. And they were really offended that she had a tough time saying yes and trying to put conditions on it and worrying about it. And yet, if you had any sense at all, you would at least have to think about what you were giving up. Yes, you'd have great sex every, you know, you'd have servants, and yes, but you would lose everything that you'd worked so hard for. You could only have anything for the rest of your life through permission of your husband.
So this was very close to my heart while I was writing 2 books ago. The Earl, she's a pamphleteer. It's 1825, I think, and she's a pamphleteer, which means, you know, kind of like the equivalent of a blogger today. And she's a proto-feminist activist, because they weren't really using the term feminism then. And she is fighting for women's rights. And she's I'm not going to give this spoiler, but in any case, she's got a nemesis, and their battle is very public, and he's clearly an aristocrat. He's very haughty. They both have secret identities. And I had to decide, and she's fighting for women's rights throughout the novel. She's petitioning Parliament. She's trying to petition all sorts of members of Parliament to change the laws, these laws that Lisa has just spoken of. And I had to make a decision at the end, because it's a historical romance. And was I going to make this woman, this feminist activist, get married to this Earl at the end of the book? You know, who won't marry an Earl when you're in love with him? And, you know, he needs legitimate heirs, and that was tough. I actually asked a lot of advice, because I couldn't decide. It was, you know, on the other hand, we have not on the other hand, but we have powerful, strong women in history. My favorite, Bev, of yours, is The Pirates. Like, Bev has, what's the book? With it? Pilar. Oh my gosh, I love her so much. And he's just so, I mean, it's a smackdown. She's gotten smacked down. But I love her because it's this community of women who have power, who work, sometimes on the edges or the outside of the law, but they're doing what they have to do. And Alyssa's book, which is the one that, it's An Extraordinary Union, which is just totally great, right? Where this woman is working and brilliant and doing amazing things. So then we have these characters in history, and then we have to make the decision. But fortunately, we're writing them now for us, right? So we can make the decisions that make us all feel satisfied. I love what you said, Lisa, about the feminism and fantasy. Like, what romance does today is a combination of feminism and fantasy, and we're doing it, and it's so incredibly satisfying.
Well, yeah, and I feel very strongly that all of us should be allowed to have our fantasies and not have everyone assume that just because we have a fantasy of being thrown across a horse, that that's what we want in real life. You know, we're entitled to our fantasies.
Yeah, I mean, if men can have old Arnold movies, we can have what we want to.
I think that is an important point, because I think only for women is escapism seen as something bad or something to be derided. Men have all kinds of escapism. Like, James Bond is escapism. Like, that is like, and I'm not saying women can't watch that as well, but you know, when it is something that's predominantly consumed by women, young adult has the same issue. When it's predominantly consumed by young women, especially, we consider it something frivolous or unnecessary. And, you know, if you look at how bad things are sometimes for some people, if you don't have a way in your mind to escape that, I mean, what can you do? It's hard. It's really, really hard to make it through each day, or even sometimes get up in the morning if you don't have some kernel of hope to get you out of that bed.
Do you remember, like 3 years back or so, someone in the media said that women shouldn't read romance novels because it would make you not desire your own husband?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's a common theme, yeah. A part of it, because guys can watch James Bond and we don't expect them to go like jump out of a helicopter. But I think
Even if you want them to.
or on the side of a building. But I think there is this fear that we're reading these things and then we'll be like, well, why don't you do that? Whereas, you know, I think that is an unexamined fear, in addition to just deriding things that women enjoy, but there's also the fear that they're not going to live up to whatever they imagine us reading, when it's just like the craziest thing in most romances besides, you know, people being spies or werewolves. Is that the couple communicates and has like that's not really but that's the thing that might be scarier to them.
And I think, we've all heard about unrealistic expectations, right? Like, they'll give you unrealistic expectations, and we've been told this forever. No matter what, even in the olden days when they were reading, you know, Jane Austen or whatever, it's going to give you ideas. And when you think about it, like, you examine that a little bit deeper, and I can tell you, like, I once I had a relationship end with this guy, and he said to me, "I feel like you have too many expectations of me." And I said, and I talked to Alyssa, and I was like, Alyssa, because Alyssa has like a front row seat for my entire life. And I said, Alyssa, like, he said I had expectations, but really I just expected him not to be an asshole. And she's like, low bar. Wow. I don't have even a medium bar for most men. It's very low. I know now. I'm in my 30s. Like, but why shouldn't I have high bars? But this was like, this was it, right? Like, I had no expectations really of this relationship. We hadn't been dating long. And I said to her, and she said, you know, if you've been talking to someone for 5 minutes, your expectation is they're not going to punch you in the face. And I was like, right. It is an expectation of respect and communication, and then, you know, if that follows, whatever comes next. But it is an expectation to be treated well. And that's not unrealistic. That is the bare minimum, and you should go well above that minimum.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like, you know, the idea that a woman can be like happy in her personal and professional life and interact with people who are not assholes on a regular basis, it seems like a baseline to me.
And y'all all smart. You know what you're reading is fiction. But that expectation of being treated the way you should be treated, to expect communication. You know, I was with my husband for 30 years. Loved him dearly. But like I said, there were days I wanted to bury his ass in the backyard. And we go through that. But you also have expectations of, like I said, being treated like a human being. What is wrong with that? I don't know. I'm gonna stop.
I've been writing books lately with heroes who are especially nurturing. I mean, they're like big, strong, alpha, giant guys, but they're doing especially nurturing things. I love that. Yeah, and it's because I just decided I wanted the heroes to be able to help the heroines heal. Like, this is a tough world we live in. My cabbie on the way over, both of my drivers today, like, the stories they're telling me, I don't know, did I look like a bartender? I'm not sure. Like, I just walked, got in the car and said hi. And the stories, this is hard, and I think it's particularly hard. I'm not going to complain because we have this wonderful support. We have our sisterhoods, we have our families, we have our friends. But it is hard, particularly to be a woman, because of, Lisa, we mentioned it, right? Because of all the expectations of us, right? And the expectations that others have of us. And I loved writing these heroes that were helping the heroines figure out how to have love and at the same time have independence and autonomy and strength. And I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, that gives me a chance to jump into a theme that I wanted to explore. That I think the Duke and a couple other books get as well, is like, there's this stereotype of, particularly of historical romance, of the alpha male as, like, the wounded alpha who does not know how to love, and must be taught, must be shown the ways of compassion that will pierce the ice around his heart, blah 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 blah. And as you said, I mean, like, your hero, like, Gabrielle and the Duke is incredibly nurturing, and Sarah MacLean has this great story of how she, like, rewrote one of her most recent novels from top to bottom because she woke up the morning after the election and realized that her alpha male hero was a jerk, to say it, and probably would have voted for Trump if he were not like a 19th century Duke. And so she wrote, like, a more nurturing, proto-feminist male, and I think that there's a lot of that going on in all of these books. That your male heroes are a lot more emotionally complex than outsiders give the genre credit for.
I was just gonna say, because there are men out there that are like that.
Yeah, I think that's always. I feel like for as long as I've been reading romance, I've been reading male heroes who were, could be alpha, but who were nurturing, I mean, I think it's just what, I don't know, there are books with like gross outwards, I guess, but I don't read them. Because I'm not knocking anyone who does enjoy this, but I'm just like, I don't think this is some kind of new phenomenon or anything, because people have always been writing these kinds of heroes, and particularly, oh God, why am I blanking? Like The Devil's Delilah, for example. How long ago was that written? That's like the ultimate beta supportive hero. I do think that we are paying a little more attention to what we're putting into books, and not because of Trump. Like, I'm not going to go into that. But I do think that for me, when I put more care into my heroes and how they treat the heroines, I think it's because I know I am, and kind of everyone is right now, a little more sensitive, because we're all being forced to kind of relive terrible things that have happened, or that happened to our friends, or just are happening in the world. So I'm like, I honestly could care less about Trump in that perspective, but more I'm wondering, if someone's reading this book, I don't want them to read something that will, if they're already sensitive, or have all of these things that we dread stuff. Because again, this goes to the thing where we were talking about the, get it closer to my mouth. Like you were talking about the nipples. But like how, one person wrote pink nipples and then everyone started writing that. And the same thing can happen with so many things in romance. For example, just like starting to describe a kiss, and then you describe the hero grabbing the heroine. But does he need to grab the heroine? It's just a tick that we've learned for so long. And right now I'm like, I don't want to read about a hero just grabbing the heroine unless she wants to be grabbed in that moment. So I think like that's what more I'm thinking about. Like, I wouldn't write a Trump hero anyway because fuck Trump. But like, but just I think like that. I think everyone is a little more sensitive to how they're describing the interactions and how they're making sure that, like, while maybe not necessarily rewriting everything, but kind of making sure that your reader is not going to say, oh no, this reminds me of something I don't want to think about, and then put the book down now. But those books are out there, and if people are in the mood for them, they know what they are. Like, I think that's the thing. People have to know what they're getting into. You can't just put out, like, a straightforward romance, and then the reader picks it up, and then there's something, like, shady that takes them by surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this isn't, like Alyssa said, this isn't new. Like, I started reading romance when I was 13, and within, like, a year, I knew, like, what kinds of heroes I liked, and what kind of heroines I liked, and, what kind of genres I liked, because the genre is so vast. And so, like, I grew up on, like, Jane Ann Krantz, and she had some, like, straight-up cinnamon roll heroes. Like, they were, like, soft, they, like, wore glasses and did Tai Chi. I mean, they were, like, soft heroes. So this isn't something that just came about, like we've always had, like I said, more problematic aspects, and we've been having these discussions for a long time, but, the idea that this is sudden or new or anything, in terms of a lot of things, like consent or heroes, archetypes, or heroines, I think maybe, hopefully, authors are putting more care into whatever they're writing, because we're hurting, like everybody's hurting. And it is good when you read something and you don't hurt more in this genre particularly, or you hurt in a good way, like you get closure at the end, like you get cathartic crying, but then like, you're happy at the end.
You hurt and you feel hope.
Yeah.
I mean, the hurt is real, right?
Yeah.
But you feel the hope in the sense that it can be gotten through, and you can. I love all of your novels because of the communities of relationships, especially with women, but the communities of brothers and sisters, and just that it represents support, love, and hope, especially. I think the best fan mail I get is the ones where people's, oh no, I love all fan mail. Like where somebody writes and says, this makes me feel stronger. Like and I get that. When I read a romance novel, right, I feel like I feel stronger. Like I can stand up and say, this is important to me, and I'm going to keep saying it's important to me until you listen.
I want to springboard off of something that you said earlier, Alisha, about the Forbidden Hearts series, and the idea that you were looking at it like a small or slightly upscale community, mid-size, but a community where if you looked for things, you would find them. You would get past the assumptions that people made. and, or a reader would, not that you would, but that there were things to see there if you only looked. And I want to springboard from that because I think like one of the things about Beverly's entire line of work is that it's like, you think you know American history? Let Beverly tell you some things about American history.
Well, I think you have that old proverb, and I don't know what culture it's from, that, history is written by, the conqueror. That's right. So they're going to tell the story their way. When there's always 2 or 3 or 4 sides to the story. And one of my, one of the greatest examples for me was, or is, Custer's Last Stand. Okay, whatever it's called, that's not what the Cheyenne call it. The Cheyenne call it the battle where the sister saved her brother. Because for them, this brave got injured, fell off his horse, his sister rode in, picked up her brother, threw him over the back of the horse, and rode him home. For them, that stood out in the battle. It had nothing to do with Custer at all. So it depends on who's telling the story and how it's passed down. So, and if I don't tell, and my girl here, and all of the other young African American women or women of color who are telling their stories, if we don't, who will?
I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So if anybody has any.
All the way in the back.
All the way in the back?
Yeah, right there.
Okay.
Hi. Thanks, guys. So trying to figure out how to phrase this. We talked a lot about diversity and our very diverse group of women, real women. And we're nuanced and we're different. And I'm just wondering how you feel about cover art representation and how much agency you feel like you have in making sure your characters are represented, like their strong, independent, diverse characters are represented in your cover art, particularly body types.
Oh, that's a great.
Trying to get us in trouble.
Let me repeat that for anybody who didn't hear it, just in case. It's a question about diversity and cover art representation, and to paraphrase, how much agency or control over do you have in making sure that the women and the men on the covers look like your characters?
Can I just say, I just read just today Alisha's Ron to Need You. The covers of these books are spectacularly beautiful. Way to go, Avon. But I love the cover because it represents them. I mean, she looks like her on the cover, and he looks amazing.
Yeah, he's
It was beautiful. And I actually wanted to ask you, can I ask you in front of everybody? Who chose the models? What did you, how did it happen?
I chose them. She helped because she wanted to. No, these covers, the Forbidden Hearts covers, all turned out great. The third one's really good too. Sometimes, even when you have a lot of agency and stuff, and sometimes you're limited by what the stock is, in terms of even when you're doing a cover shoot, just getting the models. Like for example, you talked about body size. It is very difficult to find, because in modeling world, plus size is a 12, and she's 5'10". Yeah. So it's it's difficult to on that terms. But I've been really happy with all the Forbidden Hearts covers. I had a lot of input. I got to pick all the models, but the Wrong to Need You was a lot of fun because that guy is nice looking. And it's cute because the woman who's on it, I guess, she's a model, and her mom found me. And keeps commenting on any post I do about that cover with, that's my daughter. Very cute. Very cute. It's the cutest thing in the world. I wonder what the model thinks about it. It is very, very cute. But yeah, so those covers turned out great, and I'm really happy with them. It can be hard though sometimes because you are limited by what's available.
And can I ask Beth, with Breathless, you describe the heroine as ebony, and she's light on the cover. She's not light; she's sort of medium.
I know.
So
Don't get me started. You know, and like she said, all we can do sometimes is deal with the stock or the person that we have. Like, we had this great brother that was going to be on the cover of Tempest. His ass didn't show up for the shoot. So, hello? See, y'all making me cuss. But, you know, we can only, you know, and yes, I wish that there was more to pick from. We all do. But, you know, you gotta go with what you got, so. But they do send me guys and say, do you like this, do you like that, do you like this, do you like this?
I think, yeah, like very rarely at this point, I think maybe a few years ago there might be issues of them sending you someone who was like, could pass as white and saying, here, put this on your cover. But I think now most publishers are really open to trying to get the best possible person. But yeah, like you said, the people could just not show up, or there could be scheduling differences. If you're getting models to do the shoot, also finding someone that's the right size, because yeah, the curvy section is like size 8 through 12. Also like a lot of people have to use stock photos because cover shoots are expensive, and like people who are self-publishing who are using stock photos, again, that's something that's getting better as far as diversity in the models is going, but you can find a lot, like before when you would search, like, first of all you have to search African woman, because if you search black, it will just be a bunch of white women wearing black dresses. So then even with that, and it's always someone that's like, I have no idea why all of these photographers are telling black women to look surprised. Photos are women like with their hands on their face for some reason, so you can't use it for a cover photo. It is, and there are some photographers are starting stock photo places that are specifically black women or specifically women of color. But then, like, you know, there are the levels of that, like trying to find someone who did stock photo, and if you want a couple, that's a whole other thing. And if you want like a queer couple, that's a whole other thing. So like finding all the variations is different, and it can be very difficult to find people. I do think, in my experience at least, that publishers are really trying harder to find, to make the best possible cover and to take feedback, and to, if you don't like something, try and figure out why. As long as you just have a reason. If you just say, I don't like it, that's not helpful for them. But I think if you have actual feedback, they're usually pretty receptive, so there is some agency, but you can't control the models who don't show up. Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Cool. And we have time for one more, and further, the lady in the back was first. No, you. Yeah.
So, like you guys have been talking about all night, the genre itself is working really hard to kind of put reality into the novels, and it's no longer the woman being thrown over the back of the horse. And that's just kind of a constant part of romance these days. But did you ever have you had a moment, and what was it like if you like wrote something or realized where something was going, and had that moment of like, oh my god, I'm gonna break the genre? And like, how did you kind of like move through that of just like a moment when you realized you were doing something completely different and you weren't entirely sure how your readers and the readers of romance in general were going to respond to it?
Okay, that's a great question. The question for those who didn't hear is, have you ever been writing something and realized that it's like you're about to just completely break conventions, in two, and realize that it's like you're about to smash through all the, stereotypes and expectations. What do you do when you're writing something that's like pushing the edge of the envelope like that?
I feel like that happens every book, like every manuscript, like everyone more than the next, and it's like the best moment ever. I love it.
For me, it never feels like a big thing. It feels like lots and lots of small moments and small pushes. If that's how, I feel like I, as a person, am always having to progress and learn, and sometimes unlearn a lot of stuff. But I think change happens through all of us persistently pushing the edge of the envelope.
And I think we're pushing the envelope just by being here.
Yeah. I think just by writing in general, I don't really like purpose. The only thing I can think of that I do actively try to do, I was talking to someone about this earlier. I was talking about how in that one, you were talking about describing people as food color, as food, like chocolate or whatever. And someone said, well, you can't just use brown because that's whatever. And
Ugly.
yeah, so now I purposely use brown. How beautiful brown is, because brown, like, why should the word brown signify ugliness? Half of us in here are brown and we're not ugly.
I mean, I think, like, especially for those of us who started our career in a time when just the fact that we were writing was considered like a risk, you know, as Beverly said, we're here. So, you know, but I think we've all sort of had those moments, like I remember in like 2012, 13, like I was ready to quit writing because I was like, I'm not getting anywhere, like a lot of work, and you know, it just didn't seem like it was really, like I was getting any traction. And I was like, I'll just write one last book. The woman's gonna be a billionaire, she's gonna throw orgies. And it jump started my career. And like, you know, but like stuff like that, but I was like, fuck it, you know? And that was sort of my, you know, whatever moment where, but it worked out well because, for me, by chance almost, but like, you know, it can work really well. So I think, you know, whenever, yeah, fuck it. So, you know, but I think, you know, anytime somebody says like, oh, it's done, it's tired, or whatever, you can literally write anything in this genre and make it brand new. You can take risks. You can, you know, the sky's the limit on what you can write as long as there's a happy ending.
That's the beauty of romance. You know, that is the beauty of romance because it's so wide, it's so varied. You can do just about any subgenre. I love what we do.